that we will look at. And the first pattern is someone has been talking. The example is slightly different from the one in the book. And this is the first divide, subject and predicate. And the predicate is has been talking here. If we look at the subject, then we have subject, and in this case the subject is someone. And the predicate here consists of 3 words. Someone has been talking. The whole thing is in fact the predicator in this particular case. So if we have the predicator, there are no other objects, there's nothing that follows. So we have we have a help or an auxiliary verb. The first one is finite. We also, and this verb is has. Then we have another verb in the predicator. This is also a help verb. You can only have one finite verb in the predicator, so this is non-finite. And then you have the lexical verb, and this is also non-finite. So this was been, and this was talking. We could have had an adverbial here. We could have said someone has been talking loudly, and if we'd have had loudly, then we would have had an adverbial here, a predicator and an adverbial in the predicate, and then we could have had loudly here. But in that case, the adverbial would have been, it's an optional element, and that's not included in this particular example. So this is the phrase structure tree for pattern 1. If we now move on to pattern 2, and pattern 2 is a subject, a predicator, and an adverbial complement. The abbreviations are slightly different in your book. And pattern 2, it's an adverbial complement because here the adverbial is necessary. For the time being, at least one of them is. This one here, for the time being, is also an adverbial, but is not necessary. But my parents are living. You need to say something else. And because this adverbial is necessary, it's an adverbial complement. So once again, we do the first divide. And this is, now you'll see where we've got the subject as the first divide and how this is different just to S. And the predicate begins here. So if we look at this in detail then, we have first of all an adverbial, and that adverbial is for the time being. And we're going to do something here. This adverbial is optional, so I'm going to give it another color just so we're clear about this. And yellow means optional. Also in the subject we have the subject itself, and in this case it's my parents. Later on we'll be looking at the head of the subject, but that will be later on in the course. Meanwhile, in the predicate we have a predicator, are living, and we have an adverbial complement. And in the predicator there are 2 words in the predicator, and so we have the first one is a help verb, and it's finite, and the second one is the lexical verb, and it's non-finite. So we have are and living. And the adverbial complement is in Chicago. So this represents the sentence pattern for the second one. As I mentioned, later on we'll be analyzing these parts further, but for the time being, this will do. This is the end of the first part of these recordings.